We're the Vinyl Verdict, and today we're covering George Harrison's first solo album, All Things Must Pass. We got the original album from 1970 and a CD remaster, and it's been remastered many times. It's a triple album. It was recorded between May 1970 and October of 1970, released in November around Thanksgiving 1970. It's a huge collection. A lot of the tracks were actually a backlog that George was developing in the Beatles. Some of them stretch back as far as 1966. Some of them were written much more recently during 1970. There's a lot of mythos around this album. It's George Harrison's most successful solo album, and arguably of all the solo Beatles, it sold the most copies. And so it kind of created, I think, a lot of George Harrison's identity and who he was, and how the public perceives him in his solo career, and even the way they look at the Beatles actually is kind of through a lens of this album. But when you actually count the unique tracks on here, if you exclude the jams, which is kind of, a one-take thing that they did around one or two chord progressions. And if you only count one version of Isn't It a Pity, because there's two on here, there's only 17 unique songs on the entire album. And then counting the era these songs are from, I thought it was interesting because there's a couple, again, that go back to 1966. The bulk of them are probably late 68, 69, both when he was working with Dylan for a while, and then in the band, I think he had some, a lot of inspiration. There are only 5 of those 17 songs that I can say definitively are from 1970, or at least it's kind of vague where they're from. So that's pretty interesting, and I don't know that those are even, some of the standout tracks. So it just shows that he wasn't necessarily doing a lot of writing in 1970, but he was doing a lot of recording and getting this down and figuring out which ones to pick from his backlog. But, it is almost like a compilation of all the songs he was writing in the second half of the Beatles. Obviously, he is not with the Beatles here, so that was a thing every Beatle faced in their solo career, of how to represent themselves and who do they play with. They're not going to play every instrument unless you're Paul. So George, he picked Ringo. Ringo starts doing drums on the album, but he picked a lot of other all-star, musicians to surround himself with. Eric Clapton is doing much of the lead guitar on the album. Gary Wright is there on keyboards. Billy Preston, Klaus Voormann, Alan White, John Barham, Peter Drake doing the pedal steel guitar, which is very iconic on many of the tracks. And then, of course, Badfinger is there on acoustic guitars. Phil Spector was the producer, and he brought in the Wall of Sound, which, for better or worse, has made the album very iconic. As I mentioned, of course, this hit #1 everywhere, extremely successful. It went 7 times platinum in the US, and My Sweet Lord was a hit around the world, #1 hit, and What Is Life was a top 10 hit. So, really successful album from the Beatle, who was not known for being front and center on the stage. He was the quiet Beatle, and here he is out of the gate with a triple album, multiple top 10 hits, and just a huge backlog of music that I don't think anyone was expecting. And so it was kind of a surprise and delight, and it created this narrative that the press latched onto. It maybe he was suppressed during the Beatles, and he was constantly trying to get this music out, and it just wasn't possible until this moment, which I think there's a little bit of a myth behind that. But it is very different, and I would say of all the solo albums, probably has the biggest contrast to anything that the Beatles were making a year or two prior to when this came out. I guess to set the stage, McCartney had already released his first solo album. The Let It Be movie had just come out, and then George went into the studio, so that's an interesting background for when he started recording this track.
Well, this year, the narrative was kind of there from the beginning, and I think simultaneous maybe with the release, perhaps, but the press was very much kind of shaped the way we thought at the time, too, which was that George really broke out, which he did. This was tremendously successful. This unknown genius that had been in the Beatles all the time. Well, he wasn't really unknown, and his talent was known. So, yeah, well, he was held back like any of us would be held back trying to play with Lennon McCartney. I don't think he did so badly.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a holdback there, if you want to use that phrase. It's just a question of the quality of what they were doing. With no negative. George was in there too doing quality. Yeah. But these guys were at a surreal level, I guess you could say. He did have a wealth of material. But the Beatles were working on a number of these songs as they worked on Give Me Some Truth with John, or Paul was playing Backseat of My Car and another Teddy Boy or whatever it was. The Beatles were still the Beatles at that point until they weren't. And they were helping with some of these songs. So I didn't really see him being held down musically in that sense, other than the nature of things, which is that he was with probably the most iconic songwriting team, period. So even when they didn't get along that great, they were a team, and that's obvious when you get back. Mm-hmm. However, it was a big album. Jesus Christ Superstar had come out, I believe, that same year with a big triple, or maybe it was double, but huge box album like this was. And then came, I think, the Beatle thing. I can't remember which came first, but there was no album that looked like this. And other than that third album, which even at the time was kind of semi-dismissed, it wasn't really...
Everybody listens to it once.
Once.
That's what they say,
yeah. Exactly right. And then it was time to absorb all George's songs, which we really didn't know, which were laden and heavily laden with philosophical, really quasi or religious overtones, a lot of it. And at the time, to me, as a young guy, I felt that was a little... I was being preached to a little bit, and it seemed somewhat ponderous, but I was always listening to the music, and the music caught your attention in a lot of places. Although as I grew to know the album more, the sound of it, maybe that's the Phil Spector production, it just kind of merged. Is that The Art of Dying? Is that Run of the Mill? Is that Beware of Darkness? Is it? And they had a similar production sound, and I think even at the end of his life, if I'm correct, George spoke of stripping some of that sound away and how he wouldn't do it the same way today. Anyway, that was the album, and it was big, and there was enough on there to have something come to you that you began to really care about and got into your musical lexicon. I didn't put down the album and walk away humming anything from it. You had to really absorb it over time and see some of the complexities come out, although the first thing that jumped out at me with no difficulty was Apple Scruffs, which I remember liking, and right away with it. It bounced a little. It had some movement, the harmonica, something. And I hear it now, and I hear all the guitars, and God knows Badfinger was on there, so for that reason alone, I cherish it.
One thing I like about this album, and on vinyl especially, you really can just leave it on, and it does kind of merge together. For the most part, there's not these jarring moments that jump out at you. You can kind of just leave it on, and it has a calming feel to it, and almost spiritual, without being specifically of one religion. I mean, we know where George sits on it, but that doesn't come out too much. It's just kind of vaguely religious imagery. That it certainly is a very uniform album. Debatably, I think even a little bit of a concept album, and having that spirituality and coming to terms with a lot of that after the Beatles.
One of the words I didn't mention was melodicism, and being in the Beatles and being as well tuned to it, obviously, as he was the guy in the middle. He knew what he was doing. He always knew what he was doing. And yet, maybe somewhat unfairly, when this came out, you were looking for that melodicism. I was, or something, I guess I have to admit, something Beatlesque or something you could relate to. And when these songs hit you, it was new. It's nothing you'd ever heard before. The lyrical content was completely unheard of before. And the music, for the most part, the chords, some of the changes, it was unique to his music at that time. And as I say, it just merged into almost like a therapy almost, but nevertheless a kind of believing, feeling in what he was expressing. But musically, it wasn't always keeping me that excited, I guess you could say.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I agree it's more laid back. I do think this is some of the most melodic stuff that George ever put out and any Beatle ever put out. George has a lot of melody. Sometimes he actually goes too far into the melody, where I think, like you're saying, it doesn't stick with you. It's hard to hum because it's almost like chords are very strange on this album. It's not as accessible.
That's for sure.
And that's the reason why when I mentioned Badfinger played acoustic guitar, most albums you'd be like, okay, they sat there and played some chords on acoustic guitar. The chords on this album are pretty complicated. Like really weird diminished, augmented stuff constantly in the way. And they're playing in different tunings. Like one guitar would be tuned or have a capo higher up. And so they're recreating it. And that's what's giving it that wall of sound. Is people are like, isn't it a pity? It's probably guitars tuned in 4 different ways to create that effect. So yeah, I give them a lot of credit for actually contributing to that sound. They're definitely not Beatle melodies. Yeah, they're like spiritual hymns and stuff, the way he's writing them. I think it's also interesting the parallels with Plastic Ono Band, because John, Ringo, Klaus Voormann, and this is again Ringo and Klaus Voormann really backing up the rhythm section of All Things Must Pass. Spector's producing again. He was like co-producing Plastic Ono Band.
I would tend to think he didn't because it's so raw and stripped.
Yeah, but there's still a lot of reverb and stuff. He did, but I think John had more influence.
Given everything we've said about the myth and everything, it was impressive to see an album with all these songs on it and put the needle on it for the first time. So, this is a Beatle. Here's it seemed like a million songs actually. I think the takeaway is how unrestrained it is. Even though it's only 17 songs, they're long. Like he's not cutting it. He's not saying I need the 13 best songs or the 14, and he's not saying they need to be 3.5 minutes. A lot of conventions you associate at that time
compared to the Beatles too. Yeah.
Yes.
Even the album cover, like you're saying. To me, what always stood out is the black and white thing, which is kind of the opposite. Like this guy did Sgt. Pepper. He was in the band that did that, and now by 1970, like it's just got a pretty gray world now.
I felt that way a little bit.
Yeah.
It actually felt that way a little bit, especially after the Let It Be, although it wasn't the last thing recorded, it's the last thing you saw here. And everybody loved and rocked out to Get Back, but there was a sadness the way they cut it or whatever. It was a sad thing. Everything seemed sad.
So the album does not open up with My Sweet Lord. I always forget that. It opens with I'd Have You Anytime, which is actually a co-written song with Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's not on the album. He doesn't play on anything. But he used this co-written song from November 68. And it's like an otherworldly therapy session or something that he's taking you into compared to what Abbey Road was. He ends on the end is the last time you heard him doing his soloing and, you know, kind of this big message. And now
it was a very, I actually, out of all the songs, you know, that was going to let you know the sound of the album that was going to be different. And whether from the Dylan collaboration or not, this one did catch my attention. And I peaceful, flowing, different sound than you ever heard.
It's actually, I think it's written, it's like something where he was trying to invite Dylan to be more like on this, like to play live again, and he's saying I'd have, like he's, you know, it's like their friendship. But I think it works because, I mean, I was thinking of it in terms of Paul's doing his own thing. He doesn't want to be in the press. The press is after him. Lennon's like doing his Primal Scream stuff. And then George is kicking off his album with like welcoming you and being like, I'll still have you. Which I do think is a very different tone than all the other Beatles are over. He's still kind of speaking to his fans directly on this album. But very strange to start an album where it's like you're free of the Beatles, you can do whatever you want, and it's a co-written song. Then the second song, My Sweet Lord, is the next solo song is also not really one George wrote completely, right? So, I mean, at the time he did, but
the court didn't think so.
Yeah. But, My Sweet Lord, written December 69, so, you know, right at the kind of verge of the Beatles breaking up. And again, the whole album was spiritual, but this one he's actually bringing in like Christian imagery, Hindu imagery, you know, all this stuff into the same song. It really sounds powerful after the opener, because I'd Have You Anytime is like very laid back. The build is just very strategic in the song, the way when the drums come in after the second chorus, when the harmonies start coming in, like it kind of gets bigger and bigger. Yes, the reverb gets bigger.
Yeah,
so
it does.
That's a cool effect.
But you raise an interesting point that I do remember with it. So it's so heavily acoustic, which doesn't happen on every song on this album. As it starts, as the song begins, as we all know, it's just you know, and it stays like that pretty much. And you're right, it slowly builds, and you keep waiting for it, it's not there. When the drum comes in, it's a powerful effect the way they did it. They delay it, they bring it in, and other things brought in too. And, you know, it was never it's such a famous song that I just leave it there. I mean, it's a song associated with him a lot.
Slide guitar, his first single out of the Beatles. I mean, that's what's so interesting. He never really played slide guitar in the Beatles, and it's like as soon as he's solo, and it's all over this album for the rest of his career, he's doing slide. The third track is Wah Wah. This was written in January 69 after, you know, during the Get Back sessions and all that stuff. Well documented. Again, similar to My Sweet Lord, I think Phil Spector's doing this thing where he's increasing the reverb and the wall of sound's getting bigger and bigger throughout the album. But this song is like almost the prime example. If someone asked me what's wall of sound, I would like have them listen to the first 10 seconds of this, which is allegedly one guitar, but it sounds like it's in like a stadium or something for the amount of reverb that's on that. But I love the riff. I think it's a really iconic riff. And I like how George is just really reaching for these notes. He's singing some really high melodies on this album, and it works. And he has a little bit of grit to his voice on it, and it works for a song with the double entendre here, I think, of the wah-wah guitar pedal, but also his emotion. And he is kind of, you know, you're giving me a wah-wah, you say it and you sound like a baby, but I think you say it that way.
I think rather clever, actually. You know, it's clever enough. It worked. And just the general negative feelings he felt, whatever he was feeling towards the latter part of the Beatles. I don't know.
Well, and from that era, there's so much chaos and bitterness, and I love the way that he's taking that and singing actually this really beautiful song. It's his liberation song, and it's almost haunting the way he sings some of the notes, and I always love the performance of it at Bangladesh. I think it's like probably the best song George plays at Bangladesh, in the sense of he looks like a frontman to me when he's playing this song.
Yeah, that's another good point, something he didn't really want to be.
Yeah, and at a lot of the concert he's not, but on this song
he could do it.
He gets a Stratocaster and he goes to the mic and he's screaming these high notes.
He could do it, and he could be that guy, but rarely was. And I think it just relates to almost being 17. And he was comfortable. He was comfortable with those guys around him. We all, I think, many of us know that he wanted those real heavy guns on the guitar around him, and yet, here he steps up.
the lyric, and I know how sweet life can be if I keep myself free. Like he has all these little inflections he puts in those melodies that almost make it bittersweet, and especially when you know the background of the Beatles and the brass handing off to the guitar. You know, there's a lot of those handoffs on this album where he doesn't do a full guitar solo, but he'll do kind of a phrase and then it'll go to brass and then back and forth, and that's really cool and it works great live. Fourth track, Isn't It a Pity, actually goes back to 1966, so Revolver era. And it's good enough there's two versions. Actually, I should say it was bad enough there were two versions, because the story is that this version that I think we listen to more often, which is kind of the faster,
yes.
You know, George didn't like it, and he wanted to redo it, and they did the second version of Isn't It a Pity, and then he said, you know what, I'm just going to keep both.
I think he was trying things. The general tone of this album was not quick, fast songs, but some of the demos were, some of the earlier stuff, but that's what I meant. That not just the production, but almost the feel of motion in the song is just similar. And when it doesn't work, it feels ponderous. When it works, it feels like the guy was as big a genius as anybody in holding back real interesting ideas that you're now privileged to hear.
I mean, Isn't It a Pity is really just a couple notes with interesting diminished chords and stuff, but reflective, sage attitude or progression, and then they build brass, and then the slide guitar comes in, and then you get these backing harmonies, and it just again gets bigger and bigger, and
it's anthemic around similar. Well, it is basically the Hey Jude.
Yeah.
Was a different little change put in there on the chord, but everybody knew what was going on there, and
it sounds so incomplete because he never finished. The Hey Jude thing is almost like out of key almost, and then it breaks into his What a Pity, which is the same falsetto, and you can barely hear him saying it. So it's like all these incomplete, weird samplings over the same riff that's been going on forever. It almost has some weird collage Revolution 9, but like a more melodic version of it.
It does cut off. You're right about that, but you hear enough. Well, it's not the exact same chords, but it's the vocals done in a way where I think Paul would know it.
I think that's side one. We flip it over to side two, and we have What Is Life, the second single, and great up-tempo, again riff-based, kind of similar to Wah Wah, and at least in doing kind of a scale. But so he wrote this with Billy Preston in mind to sing it. It makes sense because it is almost kind of gospel-y. Again, it's really high. This is very high to sing for George Harrison. So compared to My Sweet Lord, it's obviously less religious, and I think this was the label always trying to find some just kind of commercial music to put out from his album. Sixth song, If Not For You, which I forget, is just a Bob Dylan song that George was there when Bob Dylan was recording it in March 1970, so then he did it a couple months later. And the only other one he did, which is interesting, he also did a version of I Don't Want to Do It. I don't know why.
He did a cover of a song I really love called Abandoned Love by Bob Dylan, which I don't know where
I think that's later too.
It's later. That song jumped out at me. I really liked it. It really had melody. I was like, a young guy, but that was a winner right away. I mean, it just, the melody, the chorus in the middle. It was interesting that Dylan wrote it, because I think when you first listened to the album, that stood out to me on the album. It's my only point. It's one of the better songs.
And as we were saying, so they did a lot of big acoustic kind of band songs before and then after, and there was like this week or two period where they recorded just a smaller band. So Badfinger wasn't there for the sessions. That's where they brought in Peter Drake, and they did If Not For You, Behind That Locked Door, which we'll do next, I Live For You, which wasn't put out until the remaster, many years later. But all of those songs that feel smaller, they don't have the wall of sound as much. That's what I mean. They almost do stand out just because they don't have the wall of sound. But that
must be it.
So it's interesting that they're tucked on this album, but they're from a very specific week in the middle of the sessions. So seventh song, again, part of that, Behind That Locked Door, which was written in August '69. So really, that's the last month. The Beatles are wrapping up Abbey Road, and he's writing Behind That Locked Door. Again, we got Peter Drake playing pedal steel, and the song's about Bob Dylan and trying to get him to go back on stage, and he's locked in the room or whatever, and get him in front of people again.
Well, I would say it's a pretty unique song, because if that's a specific incident that's about a song like all great songs, you have the ability to be looked at in a universal way. And I guess I always liked Behind That Locked Door as for the sound of this album. He did sing a melody there that you had never really heard before, and and the country nature of it, I guess, which was Pete Drake too, and everything. It was very, it was well done, and there's different versions of it as well. I think, man.
A lot of versions of all these songs out now, especially the next one, which is Let It Down, written in late '68, obviously recorded here. I think it took me a lot of time to appreciate this one because, I mean, again, a good example of wall of sound. But it works. It's almost got like a Wagner-esque, like Rite of Spring, the way it opens up, of just the chaos of it, and then going back into this beautiful melody acoustic part, and it works with the theme of the song. I actually love, again, speaking of other versions, the acoustic version of the song, which came out on the remaster in 2000 or whatever it was. People said it was unnecessary. I love the acoustic version of the song, and I think it works in both ways very well. You almost feel the storm passing in those different sections, and it's like really a tornado, and then it's just this calming thing. And being able to create that effect without, it's not a film, you're doing that just with audio, is pretty impressive. And just the way in the song too, I was gonna say, like we talked about weird chords. This song only exists because of the ninth chord he's using here. Very iconic. Whenever I hear a ninth, I think of this song. And the other piece that I think is really notable here is in the verses, he's almost just talking, which is kind of cool for George. Because again, he's often, like I said, going off and almost like a little overpowered in the melodies and how many notes there are. And here I love how he's just kind of stream of consciousness, and I feel the charm of his personality, I guess I should say, in the way that he's delivering the lyrics here and how calmly and kind of suave he is and just talking through them. And then we get to track 9 is Run of the Mill from 1969. This is a top 3 for me. I think it wasn't until probably the 2020 remix. The more I listen to it, the more I think this encapsulates his side of the Beatles story and George's personality too. And again, the double entendre, which I guess was that there's like Trouble at the Old Mill, that song with the Beatles, but also that the song almost, it's like only a northern song, that his music is run of the mill, or the Beatles were just a run of the mill band. It's also one of Olivia Harrison's favorite songs she mentioned, which I thought really interesting. George finally shows some teeth, and he has a lot of the stuff is very cryptic maybe in what it's about or whatever, and these lyrics I think are just some of the best digs at Paul that anybody ever got. I think it's better than How Do You Sleep? And then you have the horns kind of doing this almost funeral thing. It almost feels like it's like a Pyrrhic victory for George, that he got the last shot at Paul, he has the #1 album, but then he's also somber about getting that and it being over. And so I think that's a really interesting effect. It makes it one of the more unique songs on the album. Great Klaus Vormann bass, really tight, that keeps it still, a structured song.
Yeah, it has its own atmosphere as soon as it starts, and its own oral kind of feel to it that really does make it stand out. And
we were listening to that alternate take before this too, which was cool, where they tried, it was almost like a faster version. It was faster, and it was with dual harmony guitars, like Allman Brothers style, which was interesting and catchy, and I think, again, George was almost like rapping through it a little bit more. But yeah, it takes away the heaviness, I think, because it works as a slower song. So that's the end of side 2. Side 3, we got to keep going. Track 10 is Beware of Darkness, and this one is from 1970. And it was actually written in his solo career. This is the first song we got to that was actually written after the Beatles broke up. I always thought this was kind of pretentious, and just the wall of sound is more destructive here than on some of the other tracks. And it just stays a little bit too gospel and depressing. And I like playing it on like acoustic, but something about the recording in Bangladesh and stuff, it was not one of my favorite songs from the album.
It's just associated very much with him, and in Bangladesh it was a big one, I think, for him to play. I think it went over really well there. Mm-hmm. Who can say it's not dark? I mean, he's telling you beware of it, but in the telling of it, it's a kind of a dark subject. I mean, obviously felt very burned in life, in certain situations, and even as a young guy, I mean, you want to enjoy the music, and it was different. But some of these things came through to you like, this is a little bitter. This guy's warning you. He's warning you about to look out for something, and so you were aware of that then. It was kind of heavy to me. Yeah, it was a very popular song out of the album. I mean, it just was just showing his chops. It was just showing his chops at that time, Yeah. That was his style. I mean, it was the chords spoke almost. He had some, as you were saying, if anybody ever had diminished and ninths and all kinds of offbeat, not commonly used things, he did it on this album.
Apple Scruffs, this was written in 1970, so after the Beatles broke up. Apple Scruffs are still hanging out around Apple, and you like this one a lot, right?
Well, this is the one that really jumped out at me as being a hot little George song. It didn't sound like anything else on the album. You wondered, how it got on the album. you didn't know at the time for sure that the girls outside, EMI or Abbey Road were called Apple Scruffs. But it was just, you knew Apple, and it's just there he goes. It just takes off with a harmonica and a real boom boom. It had a beat. To me, it was a more of a song I could relate to without, not so much a lecture, but without the feeling of philosophy behind it. Just a fun little number, and I loved it.
Yeah, it probably is the first song like that, and maybe the only one on here.
Maybe that's why.
Yeah, it always gave me a headache. I'm just gonna say the harmonica and the yodeling and stuff. I like the idea of it, but the harmonica, it's really grating on my ears for some reason. Well, there's no wall of sound on it, so I think that's one of the reasons you probably liked it. It's really straight, and it is just him. He recorded the harmonica live, like he put on the Dylan thing, and he just did a take with acoustic guitar and the harmonica. And I think it's one, if not the last song that was recorded for the album. So it really is kind of after he's done most of the stuff here, and he's just doing like a fun song.
Did not know that.
And it's Mal Evans tapping along, so the percussion. So it's really just him and Mal on the track. I think maybe some backing vocals later. I think I'm harsh on it because, it doesn't fit on the album. And I said I like that I can just play through it. This always kind of jumped out at me. I'm like, all right,
it did.
It's a little much. It works more as a fun message on a B-side, like for fans, than it does on this heavy album. But you can't question it. It's always been there. So track 12, Ballad of Sir Frankie Crisp, Let It Roll. Another song, totally never appreciated, didn't listen to it until 2009 on that compilation called Let It Roll, and it was just, I was coming out on vinyl again. They put this song on, and I was still like, why is that on there? Like, it's a deep cut. Now I like it a little bit more. I like the riff that it's kind of descending. There's something cyclical about it. I like George's low harmony, Sir Frankie Crisp, he does. That's kind of fun. George doesn't usually do it, but very esoteric if you don't know George lore. What is this song about? Also really interesting because if you listen to the songs he demoed, when this remix came out famously, we have 2 discs which are the day 1 and day 2 demos that he just took an acoustic guitar and played every song he had for Phil Spector, and then he did some as a band, as a 3-piece. And this song was originally part of a song called like Nobody Somebody, something like that, or same melody but different lyrics, and then it turned into this during the All Things Must Pass sessions. So I think this might be, other than the jam disc, we got to say that with every comment today, probably the only song that was written and finished from a songwriting perspective during the sessions.
I do appreciate these songs when we go through them individually, but again, there was a general merger of a lot of this sound when you first heard the album, and you couldn't take it in.
Track 13 is Waiting on You All, another 1970 song. The capital of the wall of sound again. There's just so much wall of sound. And it's said to be one of his more overtly religious compositions, clearly. But I don't know, I do like this one. I like that it's riff-based, and it's a fun riff to play. It's a really cool riff. I like, again, his melody is pretty high. It's in like the Paul register. It's not the register George is usually singing in. And I like this shot at the Pope. I think that's well done. I think that's tactful. And I like the shot at Lennon on the bed-in stuff or the peace stuff. I just think, again, it would have helped for him to be a little self-deprecating at the same time on this track. I just compare it to I Found Out, which is John Lennon saying, he found out everything about religion is fake, or whatever, it's a lie. And then George is over here saying, I found everything else is a lie except the thing I'm doing, which is like, kind of says everything about their personalities, like
a little waiting on you all.
Yeah.
It's not, we're reviewing the music, but there was an element to it where he had discovered something, as a lot of true believers of anything feel, and you hadn't yet maybe evolved to that level, and he wanted to help you along or warn you or whatever it was. That was in here. It was all in here, and that I felt all that. I don't know.
Yeah. And then track 14, All Things Must Pass, the namesake song, 1969 is when that was written because the Beatles tried that one. This is a signature song. I think it, obviously very poetic, and the chorus it brings me back to, like I said, I love Wah Wah and Waiting on You All because he's just kind of like spitfiring a lot of these lyrics and the melody, and really you got the grit in his voice. Here it's back to Beatle George, where he's very soft in hitting the high notes in the chorus, and almost kind of like that whiny George thing of really soft singing relative to the weight of the words and what he's actually saying. And he did that a lot, I think, on Something. He would sing some of those high notes actually softer.
It was interesting to hear. It was I appreciate it more now than I did then as just a song. The subjects were weighty and big, and who can argue with that all things must pass? So it was like but the song itself, it made you think.
No, and being about the Beatles, I mean, we had John. I got to keep comparing it. John had his he had God. That was his, kind of epitaph on the Beatles, and this is George's. I think, really, right? At least the placement and timing of it that's how the public perceived it. Since then it's become something else, but in 1970 it has to be about the Beatles. But like one of the lyrics, "Mine can blow those clouds away," that's Lennon who suggested the lyric, and it's here on his solo.
There's an irony to it.
Yeah.
But that's something we've learned since. But it's
still influencing him, even though it's a song about getting over him.
Yeah, it's the human experience, and in
terms of closure, I know Beatles fans are always trying to get that with like Now and Then and these John Lennon demos. I think some of the best closure we ever got was Paul McCartney performing this at the concert for George in 2002. It was a song that he tried to play in the Beatles and it didn't work out. And then 30 years later, Paul's doing it as a tribute to him next to Donnie and actually still McCartneyizing the melody a little bit. Yes. He hits different notes on it.
Yeah. It isn't always gonna be this way.
But it has a lot of emotional weight. And I think the fact that I'm sure McCartney got to choose whatever song he wanted, and that's the song he picked.
I thought some of those Beatle covers of All Things Must Pass were pretty good when I finally heard them. I thought they did. Paul certainly was trying to help him with the song, and the bass was superb. Not at all like what it finally was recorded.
My take on that is I don't think it was ever meant for the Get Back sessions. This song is not one you just play as a 4-piece in one take. It needs a lot of that's why it works with the Phil Spector production. It could have been done on Abbey Road. Why didn't they bring it back? All right, flip it over. Side 4. I Dig Love. I don't know, 1970. I loved this when I was a kid, remember?
Yeah. It's got the piano
just
pattern
fun
in there, and
it's said to be an early experiment of slide guitar because he's just kind of doing the 3 notes and he's like learning slide guitar maybe or something.
I don't know. That's an interesting thought. It caught my ear as well because of the
just fun and like the timpani and the drum.
That's right. Just another song that wasn't God's not mentioned in the song or religion or anything, and it was fun to listen to.
It's similar to Apple Scruffs. Yeah, I mean, it's about free love, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, listening to it now, it's a little cringy, but I liked it. It was more catchy than some of the other stuff.
Absolutely.
16 is Art of Dying, which again, this and Isn't a Pity go back to 1966. There's evidence I think Mark Lewison found that he might have even brought this to a Revolver session, which is crazy.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah. This is, I think, my favorite on the album. I love the edge to spirituality. I like him taking something that's a heavy concept, but then still doing like a rock version of it and just having like these nice riffs and harmonies and all of this stuff. And then the bridge is like this weird kind of perverse 50s riff that then goes into like diminished chords, but it keeps doing that 50s riff, or the kind of the scale, but it does it around all these weird chords, and the breakdown of it is just so heavy. I think it's got to be Eric Clapton. I think I won't spend that much more time on, but I really think this is like a powerful song, and it probably deserves a lot more credit than it's gotten.
I don't know of another person anywhere that I ever ran into that would have written a song like this or a title like this or anything like it, but he kind of pulled this off in a way because it's. When someone says to you right off the bat, there'll come a time when all of us must leave here, even as a kid or now, it's probably not my favorite thing that I want to listen to, I have to admit. But, I'm aware of it, thank you. That's how I felt. I was not just a young person, but I got it. It's temporary. Everything's temporary. But, it's a worthy effort.
I just think the arrangement is great.
It's a worthy effort.
The music arrangement of it is really nice, and it's hard to recreate, and just the way it kind of built, and they go back to that riff halfway through.
Yeah, it's got that riff in it.
Yeah. Then track 17, Isn't It a Pity version 2. This one I never understood. I mean, I like the idea of having a reprise on an album, but it's not intentional. I mean, he just had a take and he used it. But he had like 10, 15, maybe 20 other rejected songs. Why not use one of those? I don't get why there's 2 versions of this song on here.
The percussion of the piano on the way he did it the second time, I did catch my ear as well. I liked actually the piano version. Couldn't compete with the huge slide version and the real thing.
And then I guess that's all because he doesn't close it with Isn't It a Pity, but he's just reminding you again that the Beatles thing is a tragedy, I guess. And then we get to the album closer before the Apple Jams, gotta keep saying that. Track 18, Hear Me Lord, which was written in 1969, and the melody's just everywhere. That's what I was saying. It's like I cannot even remember the melody unless I'm listening to this song. It's just everywhere and changing all the time.
There's a beauty to it.
There is.
To the way that it's structured. There's a great beauty to it.
Yeah, really complex. Mm-hmm. And I respect it a lot more after hearing that 9-minute full version of the take, where Eric Clapton's jamming much more on it. But yeah, it's cool, and I always like the break, the above and below us, like that kind of. There's very something proggy about that in a heavy song to just go percussion and vocals, and the piano and all the soloing on there, and it really highlights a lot of the different instruments. And I think at that time, you were saying music was getting a lot heavier, and he was able to keep up with it and still have some of this religious imagery infused in it, and that was really successful, and that combination worked. It's on the song and it's all over the album.
It's a good point. From this period of 1970, even through Bangladesh into 1971, the role that I was speaking of, that the Beatles, they were always kind of seemed to be leading the way. And in the new music and the new era that there was, he had that role kind of in this little period. He had such a breakout success with this, and Bangladesh considered the first of its kind of a benefit like that. He seemed to still have the leadership role, so it's something I don't think he even wanted at all, ever, at any time. And it faded, and things moved on. But there was a period there where George seemed to be the one who had taken the role of the leader of now we could see what he's doing, or something, briefly.
Speaking of Bangladesh, the other weird thing is that, it was pretty much the same set, but Hear Me Lord was played in the first afternoon show of Bangladesh and never played again. Not played in the evening session, not played on the Dark Horse tour, never played again. And it's a complex song, so I'm just amazed. I think the only recording is like a snippet of it, of like the story behind that. And clearly he had a feeling for this song. I think there's a reason he put it at the album closer, to only perform it one time ever live. It's very interesting. So that closes the second vinyl album. The triple album then continues with a bunch of improvised jams. One reviewer I think said maybe he's not as religious as we thought, because I don't know what's happening here.
Pepperoni something?
Yeah, thanks for the pepperoni.
Thanks for the pepperoni.
I remember Jeep, who was his dog. The one that's famous is It's Johnny's Birthday, because it's John Lennon's 30th that he's singing that too.
Yeah.
And then again, he had 20 unused songs. So the jam, again, it's just part of the album. The fact that he could get away with that and would still sell 7 million copies, that says a lot, right?
Seems superfluous, and not everybody may feel this way, but it's just like, what is it even doing here? Why is there a third record of this? All tribute due to him for creating something like this at that time. And it's just that. The production and the weight of the songs was different than anything you'd ever heard, and I think he at least agreed with the production part of that.
Yeah, there's these seminal moments in Beatles history when certain things happen, and this is very unique. This is the person who only had 1 or 2 songs on an album, putting out a triple album, launching a solo career, having the biggest success of anyone in that solo career, creating a new image, just the way he looks. It's a very character-defining moment for George, and it has a Venn diagram because it's also Badfinger, really the first time getting pulled into the Beatles world. Paul wrote "Come and Get It" for him, great. That was huge success. But this is them actually getting into the sessions and now being on the official recordings, right? They're actually playing on many songs here, getting closer to George, who's going to help them with an album. And many of the musicians here, this is how they get pulled into George's orbit. They were there for George during his first album, so he brings them to Bangladesh. He helps them out. He, performs on their albums later on, and so this is almost like his posse for the first 3 or 4 years of his solo career gets defined because of this album. So yeah, let us know what you think of All Things Must Pass.